Well,
all right. We're going to go ahead and get started. It's about 9:02. I want to welcome everyone to session number 4 of the 20th Annual Northwest Interlibrary Loan and Resource Sharing Conference. NWILL wishes to acknowledge that the territory called North America, now primarily occupied by descendants of European colonizers and other immigrants, is the rightful land of Indigenous, Native American, and First Nations populations. We are all responsible for understanding the history of colonization and genocide of Indigenous people and must commit to learning, building relationships, sharing stories, and taking action to support Indigenous sovereignty, priorities, and actions. We encourage you to learn about the Indigenous populations to whom the land you occupy rightfully belongs. Please visit the documents section of the conference platform to learn more. Today's date is September 2nd, 2021. This session is titled, How Does Your ILL Garden Grow? A facilitated discussion about the future of resource sharing, and it's presented by Lars and Tom Bruno. My name is David Ketchum, and I'm the convener for the session. This session is being recorded, and it will be available online with the permission from the presenters. They do retain the copyright to the information they're presenting, and they may request its removal from public viewing in the future. At this time, it's planned that recordings will be available after captions have been added, and attendees will be notified when the recordings are available. To turn live captioning on for today's session, you can click the CC link at the bottom of the screen and select the show subtitle option. We are using the chat, Q&A, and a linked Google Doc to share ideas, ask questions, and facilitate discussions. And I'll let Tom and Lars clarify the format for the discussion shortly. The door prize keyword, the most important thing, is going to be revealed at the end of the presentation. So please be sure to see the door prize link in the event movie menu. When the Zoom webinar ends, please complete the post-survey session. In Event Mobi, it's located at the bottom of the session page. And on that note, I'm going to turn it over to Lars and Tom.
thank you, David. One more time before I leave this first slide, as David said, if you have specific questions, please use the Q&A, and David's going to help us track with that, thanks to David. But we really are going to try to make this interactive. And so if you have access to a Google Doc, here it is. We know not everybody can. During the session, we're going to be asking various questions. And if you're just getting on, you can pop in there and we ask kind of a little icebreaker, favorite fall activity. But we'll refer to that. If you can't get to the Google Doc, that's perfectly fine too, because you'll be able to kind of submit ideas via chat. And if you haven't had a chance, you could even drop in your favorite fall activity into chat. But without further ado, we're going to get started. I will say we have a number of issues for those of us that do not live near Portland. And since we can't be in there in person, we've scattered a few pictures from some of the gardens in Portland. So this is the lovely International Rose Test Garden in Portland. Most lovely thing to see. Probably be there if we, oh well, weren't virtual. But I'm glad we could be here. So my name is Lars Leon. I'm the resource sharing librarian.
And I'm Tom Bruno. I'm Director of Access Services. Oh no! What did you do to our OCLC symbols, Lars?
Well, Tom and I were not, Penn and KU's not dropping out of OCLC. We're just trying to make a point. For decades, conferences like Colorado and I believe the Northwest and some others, we've used those symbols, the OCLC symbols, to really kind of, in a simplistic sort of way, know who those other people are. And so Tom's going to kind of help set up our conversation today. And so again, we're not leaving OCLC, but to kind of help show, I mean, is this part of the future here? So we're going to, for the next 40 minutes, we're going to spend just a few minutes on sharing some highlights from our Rethinking Resource Sharing Initiative sponsored conversations this summer on what's working, what's not, trends, new tech, looking ahead, and when you think about ILL. But we're going to spend more of today on your ideas and really get into also actions. What can we take as individuals, as a group, as a collective? Tom?
Thanks, Lars. Hi, everyone. We're so happy to be here. Northwest ILL is one of my favorite conferences in the whole world. As Lars says, I'm just sorry we can't be there in person this year, but we will do our best to bring some of Portland to you. 5 years ago, I hosted a panel for Roosa Stars at ALA Annual in Orlando, back when going places was still a thing. It was called Resource Sharing in Tomorrowland, and we had 6 amazing panelists who did their best to read the tea leaves, or in our case, Jiffy Bag Fluff, and try to figure out where it was all headed. As I recall, it was a lively conversation. In fact, one of our panelists even got a strongly worded letter from the Association of American Publishers, so you knew it must have been good. I don't think any of us predicted a global pandemic, but I think many of the questions we tried to answer that day are still valid today. What is the current state of resource sharing? What trends are emerging as our systems, workflows, and patron expectations evolve? At the panel back then, my friend and colleague Scarlett Galvin remarked that resource sharing is wish fulfillment, not just for our patrons, but for ourselves. Our community finds itself at a critical juncture. Emerging systems and new technologies offer the opportunity for us to rethink the business of resource sharing from discovery to fulfillment, but they also present a new set of challenges. For the first time in what seems forever, the resource sharing world is being pulled in several different directions at once. And what was once a vast and interconnected ecosystem is turning into a series of walled gardens. As we each move forward individually, as institutions, as consortia, as partnerships, what is our collective responsibility to this common good? With apologies to Dr. Seuss, I feel like this is our Lorax moment. Who will speak for the trees? Over the past few months, the Rethinking Resource Sharing Initiative posed these questions to our colleagues in several separate chat sessions. My colleague Lars and I are going to take you through some of the major themes that emerged during those discussions, and then we'll talk amongst ourselves. Lars?
Okay. I've got so many windows open here. Here we go. So what did we hear? The Rethink Resource Sharing Initiative, and probably some of you were on those sessions. We had around 180 people attend each of 2 sessions with some duplication. Almost all of our vendors participated. It was great to have them on. We can't fit all of their ideas. We got 40 pages of ideas, but we do have a Google Doc that we'll have a link to it on the last slide today if you want to go look through all of it. But we did want to share some things that we think really help with the discussion. So one of the questions is, what we heard, feelings. Darn, I mean, such a range of feelings. And remember, we captured this before the Delta. So I don't know what it would be with that, but we heard from people that were feeling fine, some not very well. We heard a number of comments about being tired, people kind of being kind of quiet, kind of waiting to know what's going on, some nervousness. We did definitely hear, when you think about some feelings and impacts about staffing, less staffing, especially student assistants, and not being around them, but also some staff retiring. We've lost thousands of years of collective knowledge probably for retirements. Wondering what the new normal will be. But also some people positive about the many new ideas that the resource sharing world had come up with, but also people worried about technologies, lots of things on budgets and costs, but also just the impact of the pandemic and everything else that's happening. And Tom.
Yeah, some of the things that we heard that were working, as Lars mentioned, technology. So many technological solutions came to the fore, not just remote desktop work and being able to do our ILO business in the cloud, but many of our existing systems really made it possible for us to keep some continuity of service going during this very weird time period. And I think one of the things that definitely emerged from the people that we spoke with was there was an acknowledgement from and a sense of gratitude from their patrons for the services that resource sharing librarians could provide during the pandemic. At the same time, the pandemic allowed some institutions to think differently in terms of workflow, especially since with the shift from from print from a print preferred environment to a digitally preferred environment. That was certainly a huge change with things like HathiTrust ETOS, also making a large swath of print books available in ebook form, and there was some speculation about whether these shifts would become permanent as we moved, as we were optimistically thinking as we were moving out of the pandemic. But I think this is more of a cha-cha. I think we're 2 steps forward and 1 step back. So as we learn to pivot or pirouette through this next phase of COVID, what that we've learned during this process, and what new ways of doing things that we've come up with, which of these are going to continue to serve us well as we move forward. But also the sense of community really came out. Those of you who were part of OCLC shares, you may have dropped in on one or several of Dennis Massey's fantastic shares town halls. But there's been a real coming together of resource sharing professionals during this time period, and I think we have all really leaned on each other to get through this extraordinary period.
I was going to say this quote, we have a few quotes sprinkled in here. I love that this time has shown to the broader community that ILO is vital, but it's also so exhausting. That just seemed to kind of capture quite a few feelings that we had heard.
Yeah, absolutely, Lars. And I think it's really important at this moment to acknowledge that exhaustion, and also that anxiety. I don't think any of us thought we would be in quite the situation that we're in now. And I feel like there needs to be an acknowledgement of the hard work that's been done, and the hard work that we'll have yet to do.
Well, of course, we heard plenty of what's not working. And of course, some of this is not all just pandemic related, So I mentioned budgets, lots of budget comments. And what does it mean when we think about many people facing budget challenges? When we talk about the future of ILL and what we need to be doing as a community. Staffing, I mentioned the numbers, uncertainty about what's going on. And also some specific ideas that people know. Where was the information patrons wanted? How easy was it to discover, know it's available, how to get it? How well did it meet the patrons' needs? I hear from like a smaller public library who normally worked with physical materials, but when that pipeline pretty much shut down, they pivoted and had to really learn about what did it take to borrow like chapters or even ebooks. So, stories like that. And then as we get back to sharing more physical, what does that mean? Does that knowledge carry forward? Also not work. Comments. I'm worried about the resource sharing network fracturing as we pick different products that are closed off from each other. So again, the pandemic has really affected things, but obviously it's not just the pandemic that is affecting the future of ILL. Tom, for trends.
Sure. Well, ebooks certainly, as I mentioned, with Hathi with the Hathi ETOS. But also controlled digital lending, which ETOS was a large scale version, sort of a giant proof of concept for a lot of institutions. And now that many places are starting to pull out of ETOS because their print collections are accessible again to their patrons, there has been an uptick in demand for ebook-like functionality. And so is controlled digital lending going to have its moment in the sun now to help fill this expectation gap? We've also seen a lot of rethinking of policies, not just workflows, but also our policies. How, can't we extend these due dates? Can't we blanket renew items? I think a lot of the things that we thought were unthinkable back in the time before have become essential ways to keep us from being bogged down by all the bookkeeping that would have been entailed with so many overdues, so many denied renewals, so many recalls. And also it's an opportunity to look at these policies now that we're coming back to a new normal, to look at these policies through a DEI lens, also to make sure that these policies are in fact equitable, and not predicated and not predicated on assumptions that were made, not predicated on assumptions that we would not want to make of our patrons and other institutions' patrons. The concept of enhancing our services. I think a lot of people did books by mail, and now a lot of people are wrestling with whether they should be taking this back again, and walking it back, or whether they should keep it. My institution, University of Pennsylvania, has for the time being decided we are going to keep books by mail, because it was such a popular service with our patrons. But I know a lot of other places are wrestling with the cost and labor that would go into keeping enhanced services like this going. And of course, looking at new systems, with technology, looking at a couple of quotes that a couple more quotes that we had from our participants, on the next slide, Lars. Someone said, without technology, we absolutely could not do the scale of ILO requests we process each year. Thankful that OCLC has tried to do multiple projects to support the ILO community through the pandemic. OCLC's continuing expansion of WorldCat worldwide helps discovery and fulfillment. I fear as libraries are dropping out of it due to cost, will complicate ILL and create walled gardens. So sort of harkening back to what I was saying at the beginning of this, is that we seem to be in something of a moment here, where we are going in where I think the centripetal forces that we've always sort of taken for granted in the resource sharing world are now becoming centrifugal forces. Some of them, based on different vendors bringing things to the fore. Some of this, based on dissatisfaction with OCLC. Let's call it what it is. Some people have been unhappy about the cost. Some people have been unhappy about other practices of OCLC. And so I think as other systems have become viable, some people have felt that moving away from OCLC as a matter of principle is also a valid reason to do so. I think there's a lot going on here, and I hope we can discuss it a little bit.
So as we're going along, we've got a little bit more to talk about. Just another minute or two to reference from the sessions this summer. But as we're going along, feel free to, in our Google Doc, we have a question. What do you think about ideas shared? If you'd like to comment on what we've been sharing, feel free to do that. But also you can drop into the chat if you have comments like that's hogwash or that makes sense. And we'll take a minute or two when we get through that. But just as we're finishing up some comments, because as again, we have 40 pages on this, we can't do justice to everything we've heard. But some other things that stood out on what's needed is we talked about reliance on groups, and people would really reference like the IDEAS project and what they've done to help make systems work together. And some people have spoke to the new Reshare project, what that could mean to groups. But a number of people referencing standards and really wanting vendors and customers to not only talk the talk, but walk the walk. What can we do to really help these systems come together? And a couple of quotes there. Sorry, that's cut off a little bit. One quote, group sharing has allowed us to strategically reduce our print collections, remember budget issues, and allows us for consistent borrowing and lending policies. Also probably helps with budget and being perhaps taking less staff training and such, but it's also important to be able to lend and borrow outside of the group. So it was nice that person recognized the effectiveness of whatever system the group is using is great, but they still needed to share with the greater community. Another person mentioned an ideal resource sharing system that is open to any integrated system, interoperable with current function to make training easier, and a nationwide courier, and standard for the movement of physical materials. Let's ask for the moon. Let's reach the moon together. But so those were what's needed, and just a few comments from the what's needed. So we just take a couple of minutes here because we really want to get into the actions we can all take, but take a few minutes for people. And Tom and I are going to be kind of monitoring what's going on in the Google Doc and chat and trying to speak out to that. But we also will be saving the chat notes as well to add to the Google Doc.
And
so
there's a question, Lars, whether these compiled these compiled comments that we've been putting together, is it available for people who would like to dig more into that information?
As noted when we did it, we told people that whatever they put in there, we'd be shared with the greater community. And so we'll have a link at the end. It's 40. There's actually like a 2-page summary. My weak attempt. It's hard to summarize so many great ideas. So that report is available. So thoughts on anything on what do you think about the either questions you've heard or other comments about affecting our ability to effectively share as a community going forward? You know, it could be technology, it could be people, it could be policy, it could be practice. Either highlighting what's working, share some ideas, what's working that needs to carry on, what's not working that we need to fix.
Yeah, Lars, there's the Google Doc is exploding with activity. I don't know if you're keeping an eye on it.
I've got about 5 windows.
Yeah. So there's there's some really good stuff here. People are weighing in on how they're feeling about resource sharing now. They're responding to the ideas that we just shared. The theme of community, people responding to how much we have proven. I think resource sharing has always been about community and relationships, but during the pandemic, doubly so. And so I think there's definitely some agreement with that. And also, the fact that because we could share, the fact that people don't feel like they're alone out there. That they're facing similar challenges, and encourage that they were enhancing services and adjusting their policies.
Tom, I was going to say, sorry to interrupt you. So
no,
sorry, someone noted they can't edit the Google. Sorry, not sure what's going on. And Tom, but feel free to contribute comments in the chat. And again, we'll pull that out. As with the RSI conversations, we got lots and lots of ideas. And so in our short amount of time, we're going to hopefully other people hearing and seeing other people's ideas will generate some thought, but definitely here in a little bit, we're going to be talking about actions and whether it's the Rethinking Resource Sharing Initiative or any other body or individual that's wanting to kind of run with some balls that get tossed in the air. So keep that in mind as we go along, but kind of just looking at some of the things. Well, I mean, there was one comment about wondering what folks dislike about OCLC besides cost. We're not going to spend time on that here too, but I think in a productive sort of way, how can the community talk about functionality and things like that from the different vendors, and what's the things, because somebody that may like something may not mean anything to somebody else or vice versa. So yeah, there might be some comments that people do in the chat on that, but that's an example of is there a body out there that wants to host some kind of future conversation. It looks like there's of course take a hard look at Contu. There is a session coming up on copyright at this conference. I can't remember when. Look for that in your program. Hopefully it hasn't already happened, but so copyright, flexibility, seeing some other themes in there.
Well,
sorry.
Lars, that's, I saw, Elizabeth, I saw your comment about Contu, and I think what's really interesting about that is that I think controlled digital lending is going to make the controlled digital lending, especially as it applies to ILL, I think it is going to help bring the issue of copyright and libraries to the forefront of resource sharing. I think for the first time, we've seen with the Georgia State case, we've seen the test of fair use and reserves happening, but resource sharing has kind of been flying under the radar for a very long time, and I think one of the things, for good or for ill, is that the prominence and the rise of controlled digital lending and it is definitely going to. I think it's going to bring some attention to the ILL world and its intersection with copyright law. I know the Internet Archive, which has been championing the idea of CDL in libraries, is the Internet Archive is also the target of a lawsuit involving what happened last year with their own emergency access library. So this conversation is being brought to us, and I think maybe and I definitely agree that there's Cantu as well is a conversation about is long overdue, especially since I've heard from a lot of libraries recently that they've been moving away internally from handling their borrowing liabilities from a Cantu perspective and moving towards more of a free-form fair use perspective.
So hopefully, Tom, if I haven't screwed up my schedule, let's look for that session coming up. I'm going to just pick out 7 or 8 different themes. Again, apologize. Shoot, we actually have a great number of attendees today. So it looks like we might have, I can't believe there's a max on this, but sorry if you couldn't get in. What we will do is we're going to leave up this Google Doc for people to add comments to through the next week. And we'll have this doc available for people to look at. And apologies if you can't get in to edit, but then drop it into the chat and we will work that document as well. Just kind of trying to get through in a couple of minutes here, Tom. Just some other themes.
Yeah, sure.
Somebody like talking about good old share ILL and what's the next generation. Ex Libris Rapid folks have created a tool that they're trying to get the community to think of as not just Ex Libris. So that's something to look at too. But what else is out there of interest? So where do people go for this kind of information? There's a number of references to a central location for discussions, learning best practices, policy changes, comments about slowness in vendors implementing enhancements requests. Okay, session 5 is the creating a new ILO copyright. It's today at 10 a.m. Pacific, so soon. Just a few others from the chat. Nationwide Courier, lots of interest in that. Talking about the great relations that were formed, the amazing ILO community, concerned about the factoring is really striking, worrying about silos that are starting to occur between different vendors. Nationwide Courier seems like a crazy idea. Somebody pointing out really great to re-examine long-standing policies and procedures. Oh, somebody noted we do have a nationwide courier. It's called the post office. Some other comments there, but again, sorry, we're not getting everybody because like Tom said, it's just exploding with lots of ideas. And again, we will make sure and get those anybody can get in and see those afterwards.
Lars, David is relaying a question from the Q&A.
Okay.
Do we know of any policy changes, perhaps through a DEI lens, in regards to lessening or eliminating bills for lost or damaged ILLs or re-examining the amounts?
That's a great question. I mean, that was one of the action ideas that came up from the summer discussions of how does ILL help support that look, and what you're saying. I can't remember if that exactly came up, but that's the kind of thing we want to tie in together. And are there groups of people out there that kind of want to run with this kind of conversation? But I know some entities out there, some groups have looked into within their consortium and discontinuing their invoicing for lost damages because they crunch the numbers. I'm not sure if they're doing that outside, but at least within their consortiums. It wasn't necessarily through a DEI lens. It's just they looked at the numbers and it wasn't worth it. So there's really cool stuff like that going on.
There's definitely Penn belongs to 2 major consortia, and both of them have agreed to rather than invoice each other for lost books, to consider institution to institution of just saying, okay, well, we had so many of your books and you had so many of our books. Let's call it a wash. Just the acknowledgement that the billing and invoicing process is costs more money and takes more staffing than it ever would have any hope of recovering.
Tom, just a couple more before we switch gears to actions. And again, sorry, folks, we're just getting lots of ideas.
Oh yeah.
Exploding. But again, folks can see this afterwards. And we can, if you can't just ever get into Google Docs, let me know and we'll come up with another way of getting at that stuff too. But like feeling about the future of resource sharing, comments like importance of making a business case for resource sharing, professionalization. What are some high priorities like CDL and ebooks and gaining knowledge of copyright? And then, so how do we help make that happen? And there's already a number of things taking place. How do we kind of surface those conferences? And some comments about people really appreciating things like this, the conference, to really help gain an appreciation for how important ILL is. References to ILL being a resilient community. Pressures to join various vendors, systems, wondering if is that tiring, annoying? I see some hopeful comments.
I think there's definitely, I think one of the things that someone said is sort of the emergence of standards. We do have this sort of centrifugal explosion of systems, but a lot of these, a lot of vendors are talking the talk about complying with new standards in that would make resource sharing interoperability better and easier. And I guess the question is, how do we make sure that they, as Lars says, how do we make sure they also walk that walk? I think what happens often is, vendors, buy goodwill by saying the right things about interoperability and standards. But then, as we so often find out in the research sharing world, it's that last mile of service that kills us, because things are like 95% interoperable, and then we have to rely on something like IDS logic or something like that to finally make those pieces, but make that last 5% of interoperability actually work.
So Tom,
yeah,
actually, let's do one more minute, and then we'll switch the last 8 minutes on actions.
Yeah,
because we could share these ideas all day, and actually, there's already some action ideas coming out. I do want to highlight. Jen Salvo noted, there's a session number 9 tomorrow on DEI, ILL, and a call to action.
Oh, fantastic.
So people interested in the DEI lens on this, look for that. So apologies to the 385 ideas we didn't get to surface in that, but folks can see it in the chat, or again, we'll make this stuff all available, and you can even build on other people's ideas. But to really, this is really cool. I energize this kind of thinking, but we also have to what kind of actions, and we do have some ideas already. And also, because it is the pandemic and life is more than flowers, apologies to the dog people. Here are my 2 cats that I got to hang out with for 15 months. Actions, what actions? And again, drop it into the chat or drop it into the Google Doc. What kind of, we had a question, sorry. Has your participation been mostly academic libraries, much info input from public libraries?
We broke that down for that. Wasn't it the first?
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
You can see that on the top of the Google Doc. We have the link. Apologies, I don't have it off the top of my head, but we did have some participation. We actually purposely reached out to try to bring in medical. Like we actually had the NLM has broken down. They changed. I don't use DocLine, so I'm not sure, but they broke down their national structure. So we had a fair number of their new representatives participate. So that was great, along with vendors. So, but we do have a little count of the different attendees. So in our last 7-8 minutes here, actions. So it's great to talk, but what can you do as an individual to help think about this, to help move the needle forward? What can groups do? What can the community do as a whole? And as Tom actually referenced a little bit ago too, how can we engage with our stakeholders, the people that pay the bill, but also the vendors we work with? So drop some ideas into the chat or the Google Doc as you scroll down, and then we will kind of help speak to some of those as they pop in. So what can we do? And obviously there's stuff already going on, but what more can we do, especially considering the budget implications? So what can we scale up? Some of the comments that was shared here earlier, like the ideas of And I think back to some of our earlier conversations with the RSI sponsored events. Yeah, it's like my words, not theirs, but if we have 385 public libraries all rewriting their ILL policy, could there not be a central piece that then people can, edit off of? So what can be done? And if you have actually ideas about what can be done and you know who can do it, you could add that too to that.
Oh, someone said get involved with our RSI. I think
Yeah.
That's not a bad idea.
Jen wrote that. No.
But also someone mentioned work with your acquisitions folks and make sure that you're getting ILL friendly licensing. And people said, when we were, in the other sections, they were talking about the importance of being able to borrow and lend ebooks. And borrowing and lending ebooks is a complex problem, because not only is it a licensing problem, but it's also a standards and a workflow problem. And so this is something, there are these really interesting solutions that we can help advocate for. Like it would be easier, like Occam's Reader is a wonderful example of a homegrown solution that came out of Texas Tech to solve the problem of borrowing and lending ebooks. I think one of the nice things, I think the resource sharing world has always sort of had a DIY self-advocacy activist streak to it. And I think let's not lose sight of the fact that many of these systems that we currently use, like Iliad, which came out of solving the problem of ILL management out of Virginia Tech, or Rapid came out of responding to a disaster at Colorado State. These are that we can be part of the solution. We just need we don't just have to we don't need to be passive.
And Tom, I was going to say we're hurtling along with lots of attendees. I didn't see the numbers. I have too many screens open, but yeah, if this is hurtling along too long, again, on the last slide, we'll have the link, but this Google Doc, and if you can't get a Google Doc, our email is there. You could send us information. We can anonymously work it in, because we do want to kind of help take this step forward. Some ideas popping up on the Google Doc for those that can't see it. Advocating. Now, some ideas, specific action ideas were said earlier too, and so we'll capture that, but just focusing on this part. Advocate with your acquisitions folks to make sure licenses are as ILL as friendly as possible. Don't mention Con2, allow for ebook sharing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Advocacy, and Tom noted some others to advocate. Who do we work with in the library? Although I'll reference back to in your own library, there's a comment, where'd it go? As a community, I feel like we're going to need to make decisions that are suboptimum for my institution, make things better for the community as a whole. That would be an interesting discussion in of itself, how much, and we've probably kind of gone up and down a little bit through time on that.
That's a really tough one. I mean, and I think that goes to our ecosystem moment. And I feel like this is a good issue to wrestle with. Because I think, especially given the venue, I think Portland is very aware in this regard of the ecological impact. And so, I mean, but how do you make that case with your local stakeholders that you need, that the institution may need to do something for the benefit of the whole? And how how successful can you be making that case?
And some other code, Mike notes the ALA ILO code is up for revision. Watch for calls for input. I will say apologies. We've had such a great number today. I don't know if we're having issues with the Google Doc.
Yeah, something. It looks like
there's some there. The system saves. The system save things too, so I should be able to go back and grab a version from a minute or two ago. But apologies if you entered a really great comment. I will, like I say, when we're all through with this, I'm going to go in there and it saves automatically. It might have missed the last 50, 30 or whatever. So apologies for that. But please, if you don't mind, in the next week, getting back in and checking. Checking. I will see where we're at. If your ideas were not captured, be sure and do it Just a couple other, sorry, somebody asked about not seeing the Google Doc link. Sorry, it's actually, we're winding down in about 2 minutes, but we'll finish that up. Just one or two more. Yeah, there's some excellent. Okay, that's interesting. We met over, yeah, Tom. So we are practically out of time. Sorry about the, there's just so much, I don't know, between Tom and I, there's so much urgency, but yet with the pandemic, things are slow, but yet our vendor friends are working so hard to roll stuff out. But it's not just the vendors, it's myself even. I know KKU, we have a big collection. We charge a lot. And that's even made, this thinking has even made me think about, because some people have wondered about like charging. If people really want to figure out their own, to get a good cost analysis, OCLC has an ILO cost calculator, for example, you could go to and get your average costs. And it's like for a KU, and say, oh crap, we're charging this much. Maybe we can reduce our fees to expand access. So we literally are not just talking about interoperability challenges between vendors, but it's also what are we doing policy wise? Mm-hmm. And so we are practically out of time. And again, I will look into the Google Doc and make sure it's there and snarf that. We'll grab the chat ideas and the, oh, thanks, Lapis. And we'll grab the chat ideas and we'll bring this all together. And again, apologies if you put something in the last 5 minutes and somehow got overwritten. Please go back in there and do that. And this presentation will, sorry, getting back to David, trying to grab chat.
Yeah, let me just a couple thoughts at the end here. Thanks everyone. I think what we've learned is that what we've learned is the importance of community, and the importance of trust. And I think we need to rely on one another as we have in the past, but to keep on relying on one another and sharing with one another. And this has just been extraordinary. We've never broken the Google Doc before, so that I apologies for the frustration, but I think your participation was overwhelming, and we really are grateful for your contributions to this conversation. Clearly we have a lot to say here, and I think we're going to continue to have a lot to say here. But thank you for spending some time with us, and sharing your thoughts and your hopes and your fears. But hopefully you're coming away with a few more hopes than fears.
All right, well, thanks a lot, Lars. Thank you, Tom. This has been a very excellent and engaging session. I do encourage everyone to visit the Google Doc if you weren't able to. From what I could tell on my side, it looked like without publishing to the web, it allowed 99 visitors. So we were maxing out at 99, and we had around 260 participants in the session. So if you didn't get a chance to participate in the Google Doc and read all the comments, please visit later. And before everyone leaves, I also want to share the door prize clue and the answer. Can you all see the slide? The clue is, oh, I've got my chat off. The answer to the clue is Como Park. So each session is represented by a state park with a clue, and the correct answer to the clue is what gets you into the drawing. And like I said, the answer is Como Park, and I'm going to put it also in the chat. Oh, someone else has done it. All right, so be sure to visit the door prize game link. It's on the left-hand menu in the event Mobi interface, and also complete the post-session survey. And thank you to everyone. I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. Thanks, Lars. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you, David. Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Take care.